All right, 1 Samuel chapter 25. There was a man in Maon whose property was in Carmel. The man was very rich, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. The woman was clever and beautiful, but the man was surly and mean. He was a Calebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, and so David sent 10 of his young men. And David said to his young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and say to him, 'Peace be to you, and peace to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm. And they missed nothing all the time that they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your sight, for we have come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son, David.' When David's young men came, they said all of this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and the meat that I have prepared for my shearers and give it to the men who come from I do not know where?' So David's young men turned away and came back, and they told all of this to David. And David said to his men, 'Every man strap on his sword.' And every one of them strapped on his sword, and David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, 'David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he shouted insults at him. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we never missed anything when we were in the fields, as long as we were with them. They were a wall to us, both by night and by day, all the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do. For evil has been decided against our master and against all of his house. He is so ill-natured that no one can speak to him.' Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on the donkeys and said to her young men, 'Go on ahead of me. I am coming after you.' But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey and came down under the cover of the mountain, David and his men came down towards her, and she met them. Now David had said, 'Surely it was in vain that I protected all that this fellow had in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, but he has returned to me evil for good. God do so to David, and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male of all who belong to him.' When Abigail saw David, she hurried and alighted from the donkey and fell before David on her face, bowing to the ground. She fell at his feet, and she said, 'Upon me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. My lord, do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow, Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, which means fool, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men, my lord, whom you sent. Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, since the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from taking vengeance with your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be like Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant. For the Lord will certainly make my lord a sure house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. And evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. If anyone should rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living under the care of the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. When the Lord has done to my Lord according to the good things that he has spoken concerning you and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause for grief or pangs of conscience, for having shed blood without cause or for having saved himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. And blessed be you, who have kept me from blood guilt and from avenging myself by my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there would not have been left to Nabal as much as one male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought him. And he said to her, "Go up to your house in peace. See, I have heeded your voice, and I have granted you your petition." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. A long story, but an unfamiliar one that is new to many of us. If you read just a bit further than we did, you will find the strange fairy tale ending that I alluded to earlier. When Abigail goes home and the drunken Nabal finds out what she has done, he is struck dumb immediately and dies shortly after that. And David, on the other hand, is so impressed with Abigail that he chooses to take her as his wife now that she is a widow. But there is more to the story than first meets the eye, more than a fairy tale ending where the beautiful and clever woman marries the prince. First of all, David is not quite what you expect of a heroic prince. He is definitely running some sort of morally ambiguous extortion scam with his band of followers. He seems to be asking for protection money from Nabal, like some sort of mob boss with a hair-trigger temper, not what we would normally expect from the great future king, David. Nabal shows himself to be, as his name describes him, the most dangerous kind of fool. Because in his completely thoughtless pride, he puts not only his own life, but the lives of his whole household at risk. Thankfully, one of his servant boys does realize what is at stake, and sensing the impending violence ready to erupt at any moment, he tells his mistress what has happened, and Abigail responds quickly. Her pragmatism is clear. She brings a generous amount of food to win David over. And her argument is clever and flattering to David. But her courage is what strikes me the most. This is no damsel in distress. David has threatened the life of her whole household, and she is not going to let that happen. She goes before him and his whole band of fighters, a woman, alone, unarmed, with only her wits to defend her. I like to think of her a little bit as a woman in the mold of Erin Brockovich. You remember the movie. Like the feisty Julia Roberts, who plays the role of the crusading legal aid, Abigail is a woman who uses every negotiating weapon she has, even if at first it doesn't seem like much. She fights for justice for people who are in danger. She is not afraid to get her hands dirty, but the weapons that Abigail uses are ultimately peaceful ones. And that is why, even though Abigail may not be a conventional hero, I think that she is a peacemaker. She turns a situation of impending violence into peace with just a heavy dose of faith and an awful lot of courage. Blessed are the peacemakers. We all know that line. It's one of Jesus' 9 Beatitudes in the Gospel of Matthew. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. But who are peacemakers, really? It's not something we often think about or aspire to or see a lot around us. Just in the last few weeks, the headlines have contained far more news of war than of peace. War in Libya, war in Syria, riots in Libya, vitriol in politics, protests at soldiers' funerals, teenagers being bullied. And in the face of these dangers, peacemakers certainly cannot be passive conflict avoiders. All of the politeness in the world cannot make peace out of that pile of horrors. And few of us are willing to venture in. But as people of faith, we cannot help but feel compelled to think that this is not the way that things should be. Jesus' blessing of the peacemakers is a part of that very same tension, the tension between how things are and the hope that we have in God for peace and justice. Peacemakers are people who live in the midst of a broken world while still holding on to that vision of God's renewed creation. So today, inspired by Abigail, our renegade peacemakers, I want to talk about 3 characteristics that we can find in Scripture of peacemakers and what that might look like. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most well-known peacemakers of our day, uses a simple illustration that I like for the first one. He was on a road trip, traveling from Atlanta to Chattanooga, and it was dark, and his brother was driving the car. And on unlit highways at night, it's common to turn on your bright headlights so that you can see better. But of course, when you see a car coming the opposite way, you turn them back down. It's common courtesy. Well, for some reason, that night, people passing them on the road weren't turning their brights down. Car after car drove by, blinding them with their lights, until his brother finally said, "I am tired of this. The next person who drives by, I'm going to refuse to dim my lights too." And Dr. King said, "Come on, don't do that. Somebody has got to have some sense on this highway." This is the same logic that Dr. King used in his fight against the forces of racial and economic injustice in our country. Somebody has got to have some sense on this highway. Or as Jesus might say, turn the other cheek. I think we often hear Jesus' command to turn the other cheek as a call to passivity, as an impossible call to doormat Christianity. But if we look at the way that Jesus lived, we see that there is so much more to it than that. to turn the other cheek is the insistence that when faced with violence and hate, we will continue to stand on the side of peace and justice and love for our neighbor. For it is only from the vantage point of love that we can fight hate. Whether it be the smallest boy in class getting pushed around on the playground, a grown-up bully who uses intimidation as a primary business strategy, or a rogue nation who uses the threats of dangerous weapons to get its way. Cycles of violence and intimidation and dehumanization, once they have begun, are very difficult to stop. But the one thing that I would submit to you is that fighting hate with hate, fighting violence with violence, fighting fear with fear is no way to bring about peace. Somebody has got to have some sense on this highway. The second characterization of a peacemaker is the realization that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, but it is also the presence of justice. Being a peacemaker is not just about refusing to participate in the cycles of violence or hate, but it's also about actively seeking justice, because without justice, there is no true peace. I don't know about you, but I have certain people in my life who send me a lot of email forwards. I don't really like the clutter of email forwards in general. Not even the nice ones with the pretty pictures or the funny jokes. But it's the other type of email forwards that I'm talking about, the ones that encourage us to hate or ostracize some specific person or group based on some often untrue accusation. I'm not talking about things that I disagree with personally. I'm talking about messages designed to sow discord and hate. Of course, I do what the rest of you probably do. I just delete them. And I try to forget about it. I try to ignore them. Maybe I go check the facts to make myself feel better. But I usually think it isn't worth getting into an argument over. And certainly, it is not always worth getting into an argument over, but sometimes it is. And I think a peacemaker is someone who knows the difference. Someone who knows the difference between looking for a peace that is just the absence of tension and seeking peace that is the presence of real justice when necessary. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they know how to properly handle email forwards. The prophet Micah asked the people of God, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?" It is so easy for Micah to say, and it's so difficult to live. To really pursue justice means active advocacy in the face of hate and lies. It can be personal. It can be risky. But Micah insists that this is the sacrifice that God desires from us. In a world where some conspire to spread lies that turn into riots and where innocent people are killed because they are of an unknown faith, there have to be people willing to stand for truth. There have to be people willing to endure a bit of tension for the sake of justice. And that can start in something as small as speaking up when someone makes an inappropriate joke, or calling up a friend to talk about that email that they forwarded you. Only God knows how our sense of justice might grow out from there. And that brings us to the third and most important characteristic that makes a peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemakers because their hope is in God. and for that they are called children of God. To bring it back to Abigail, her ultimate hope in confronting David rests in the belief that as God's chosen king, David is more than the violent bully that he first appears to be. She has faith that David can be swayed because she has faith in David's God. And she reminds him that only God is the source of true justice, not our swords. Abigail teaches David that being a true leader is to be a peacemaker, to live boldly in the Christian hope that God is bringing about justice. Bruce C. Birch, Dean of Wesley Theological Seminary, says, "To be a peacemaker is to seek the unity of human moral agency with divine agency." Or to put it another way, if we worship a God of justice and mercy and peace, we will seek to be people of justice and mercy and peace. To bring ourselves into alignment with who God, our Creator, made us to be. Peacemaking is acting boldly on the side of justice, choosing love instead of hate, in the ultimate hope that God is reconciling all of creation to God's self. It is more than mere civil discourse. It is more than tolerance. It is love. It is seeing every person as a child of God. It is valuing truth and justice beyond having our own way. Jesus Christ died for this world so that we might be freed from the bonds of injustice, so that walls of hate and lies that divide us might be broken down, and so that all of creation might be reconciled to God. This is our hope in Jesus Christ. This is the God we know, and to be a peacemaker is to seek the same goals with faith, that through Jesus Christ, that day of peace will come when all will be called children of God. In the midst of apartheid in South Africa, the Reformed Church, our cousins in the Christian family tree, wrote a confession of faith, claiming that the foundations of their hope were for a reconciled South Africa. That hope, they said, was in the God who created and saved all of humankind, regardless of race. And they recognized that it is our identity as followers of our Savior Jesus Christ, as the Church of God, to act as peacemakers in a world of violence and injustice. So let's leave here tonight with their words of hope, that we might be peacemakers. We believe that God has entrusted the church with the message of reconciliation in and through Jesus Christ, that the church is called to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, that the church is called blessed because it is a peacemaker, that the church is witness both by word and by deed to the new heaven and the new earth in which righteousness dwells. To God be the glory. Amen.